Batman is said to have mastered over 127 martial art styles. Setting aside the fact that that's an oddly specific number, and in some stories, he learns a new martial art every year, the obvious question becomes, is that even possible? And if so, how? Whether that's technically possible because mastering root systems lets you absorb their variations faster, or whether it's completely ridiculous, isn't something I'm here to debate. Let's just say he mastered dozens of styles and leave it at that. We won't argue about how many dozens. The more interesting question is which styles he learned first that made everything else possible. Because the order you learn martial arts matters. It can affect how fast you progress, how well skills transfer, and whether those skills actually hold up in real fights. So if Batman were just a little more grounded in reality, what training order would actually make sense? That's what I'm trying to answer here today. How Bruce Wayne could somewhat realistically, and I use that word very loosely, become world-class across so many systems by his mid-20s. And which foundational disciplines he'd need to learn first to make that kind of accelerated learning possible. Just a quick disclaimer, so no one gets it twisted here. I am by no means claiming to be an expert in martial arts. I've practiced Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, and a weapons-based martial art for a number of years, and did some boxing and traditional Korean martial arts when I was younger. But I would never say that I am high level or that I have a profound grasp of any of these. So for this video, I not only made sure to research what real masters have said and written about the study of martial arts, but also discuss these ideas with friends and instructors of mine who are black belts and actual experts in their disciplines. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what's really important here, Batman. In my last couple of videos, I broke down how Bruce built himself into Batman by looking at different developmental phases: childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. I covered strength and conditioning, cognitive training, and skills work. And while I mentioned the martial arts he learned, I didn't fully explain which ones he would have learned first, not just according to common canon, but from a more realistic perspective, and how stacking them in that order speeds up and improves the learning process of everything that comes later. The best way to combine complex skills isn't by collecting techniques. It's by identifying the common thread that runs through all of them. When dealing with martial arts, that thread is partly fundamentals, that if learned and ingrained at an early age, will speed up everything that comes later. If you build movement, balance, and fight control early, you can layer other striking systems, grappling styles, weapons, and tactical combatives much faster as you mature. There's only so many ways to punch or kick, generate power, control distance, or take someone down. Most styles don't differ at that foundation. They differ in the refinement of rhythm, stance, tactics, and emphasis. You don't need to learn everything early on. You just need to learn the right things and drill them until they're unconscious actions, and then expand the skill set across other systems. And if you master a couple of the right styles first, the learning curve of others becomes easier. So what are the fundamental principles that Bruce would need to develop early? We can break it down into three basic pillars. First, mobility fundamentals. Not just flexibility, although that's part of it, but also the ability to move freely with control, posture, balance, and coordination. It would also include building footwork and spatial awareness. This transfers to every system. Second is fight control. The ability to decide where the fight happens, standing and clinch your ground, and the tools to keep it there. And the third is striking and weapons foundation. Sound hitting mechanics, timing, distance management, and understanding how force and intent change when weapons are involved. Now with that in mind, let's first look at Bruce's training timeline according to the comics, before comparing that to what a somewhat more realistic martial arts progression could look like for him. His earliest teachers besides Alfred was Ted Wildcat Grant, who trained him in boxing. This is his earliest education in striking mechanics. He also studied fencing at the Roxbury Fielding Academy, learning early weapons fundamentals, and in some storylines, while still in school, trained in Paris with, and I quote, the world's greatest fencer. In his late teens and early world travels, he studied Chinese martial arts under masters like Chu Chin Lee, Japanese arts under teachers like Tsunetomo, building broad foundational techniques in Asian martial arts. In his early 20s in Eastern Asia, he learned stealth arts and weapons, studying ninjutsu and shinobi arts with Master Kirigi and Shihan Matsuda, along with judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, aikido, and catch wrestling in secluded dojos and training halls. Then in the African wilderness, he learned survival combat and unconventional combat psychology while with the Tenai tribes of the Empty Quarter. From there, he trained under a Savat master and learned lethal precision strikes and stealth assassination techniques from David Kane. Finally, either just before or after he becomes Batman, according to some plots, he spent time with Richard Dragon, who's had some pretty intense makeovers over the years, and who helped him refine and further integrate all the martial arts he's already learned. Years after Bruce becomes Batman, he also learns under Lady Shiva, who teaches him advanced striking, grappling, combat flow, and joint manipulation. Okay, so how do we take all those somewhat schizophrenic jumps between styles and ground this enough to make sense? based on how combat experts and sports scientists would build an elite, adaptable fighter from childhood into adulthood. This is where those pillars matter. Many elite coaches agree that the order you learn martial arts in determines how quickly you pick up new styles, how good you become, and how well those skills show up in a real fight. Most also say starting young with movement-based striking creates neurological advantages you can't produce later in life. The comments got this part right. Boxing is a great start. It builds clean hand mechanics, footwork, head movement, timing, and distance control. But for Bruce, that wouldn't be enough. He'd also need early exposure to lower body striking, because qualities like hip mobility, dynamic flexibility, balance, leg dexterity, and spatial awareness peak during childhood. Miss the window to build those to their ceiling as a kid, and you'll never reach the same potential later on. That's where Taekwondo, or similar kick-focused art, and Kyokushin karate make sense. Both ingrain body control and leg dexterity that carry over to the other striking systems. Taekwondo is widely cited as an excellent style for kids to build uncommon mobility for high kicks, along with jumping, spinning, and acrobatic control. Kyokushin karate develops power with low kicks and knee strikes, while conditioning the body to give and take brutal impact. Ideally, Bruce would train both simultaneously, but if he couldn't, I'd say Taekwondo first makes sense, with Kyokushin karate added or transitioned into 2 to 3 years later, when brutal full contact sparring becomes slightly more age appropriate. At the same time, he'd also need a grappling foundation through wrestling. Many MMA coaches call it the best base for a reason. If you control where the fight happens, you control the fight. Wrestling teaches balance, posture, takedown defense, pressure, and control. And if Bruce mastered this as a kid, jiu-jitsu, sambo, and other submission-based grappling would become much faster and easier to learn, because body mechanics were already internalized. Training wrestling as a kid gives a huge advantage to both conditioning and mobility. The constant bridging, sprawling, and transitions force the body to stabilize and move efficiently under load, which builds resilient joints, a strong core, and incredible work capacity. Honestly, just the warm-up my 9-year-old son does at wrestling practice would leave most adults without this base, face down on the mat, gasping for air. And broken. Starting this young, Bruce would naturally develop the level of conditioning and durability most people never reach. Finally, fencing is the last piece of this foundations period, which we also see in the comic books. There's evidence that starting at this age is ideal for developing elite hand-eye coordination, reflexes, precise angular footwork, and deep understanding of range and closing distance. For Bruce, fencing would be the bedrock for every weapon system that came later. Alright, on to the next period, developing the base wider. This phase actually overlaps with the first. Early on, Bruce would still be training boxing, wrestling, and possibly Taekwondo or Kyokushin karate. But as he moved into his teens, he'd likely slowly phase out things like Taekwondo as he shifts more focus and energy towards systems that create the strongest possible universal base for the rest of the styles he learned. For striking, Muay Thai is one of the best universal bases. So much so that some experts would argue it should be learned before Taekwondo, or at least alongside it. I heard it put once that if you truly understand Muay Thai fundamentals, most other striking arts immediately feel familiar. You'll already understand distance, timing, and body movement. You're just learning new expressions of the same ideas. That's because Muay Thai covers every empty hand striking range: punches, kicks, knees, and elbows. And realistically, there are only so many ways the human body can throw those strikes. That said, I had a viewer leave a genuinely insightful comment on a short I made about training like a young Bruce Wayne. He referenced an older article that broke down Batman's fighting style and made an interesting point that Savate could be a better kicking base for Batman because of the influence by street fighting in Paris and how it accounts for fighters in hard footwear, making it uniquely practical for someone who fights in very large boots. But either way, Muay Thai still could make sense for Bruce at this stage because it also develops clinch fighting, durable fight conditioning, bone density and hardness, and highly efficient repeatable mechanics. Muay Thai teaches you to throw a roundhouse kick using the shortest, most efficient path from floor to target. Instead of lifting and snapping the leg, you rotate the hip and drive the shin like a baseball bat, making it both one of the quickest and most powerful kicks you can learn. Grappling would expand here too, from wrestling to jiu-jitsu and judo. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is important to internalize at this age to deeply understand positional control, escapes, and submissions. Judo layers in throws and hard takedowns. With this type of fight control mastered, he could then go on to learn sambo, catch wrestling, silat, and others easier and quicker. I also strongly believe Bruce at this age would need to begin learning blade and stick-based martial arts instead of waiting until his global training. Weapons-based Kali arts change how you understand distance, timing, and consequence. One of my martial arts instructors talks a lot about how empty hand training can teach bad responses when blades are involved. The consequence of trading blows and not acting first are much greater. Weapons training forces a proactive, precise mindset and builds hand dexterity, transitions, a deeper understanding of angles, and awareness as to when others draw weapons and how they're used. That can carry directly into other bladed arts, even things like batarang use. The earlier that broad but specific perspective is downloaded, the easier the transition is to learning other weapon systems or improvised weapon training. For the next period, Bruce, now in his mid to late teens, would begin to blend these foundational styles before setting off on his global travels to learn higher level tactics, new weapon systems, and advanced techniques from the best masters in the world. The best way to do this would be to train at an MMA gym, where he could test his current skill set and spar with better skilled fighters. He'd also start fighting in Gotham Underground fight clubs, like we see him do in Batman the Knight storyline. This would be the first exposure to chaotic violence where bad people were trying to seriously hurt him. Bruce's objective would shift to making these foundational skills unconscious action, because when this happens, they no longer cost mental energy, which means that when he leaves Gotham, he can now focus on learning any new system, ninjutsu, silat, sambo, at an accelerated pace. This period would be unique because instead of learning new techniques, he'd instead try to make sure his current skill set can hold up under fatigue, fear, and stress. Here's why this actually works. Neuroscience shows that once your brain automates a set of motor skills, things like punches, sprawls, or transitions, learning speeds up dramatically. When you drill thousands of kicks or takedowns, your brain and nervous system stop consciously managing the movement and instead wire in efficient patterns of coordination. How the hips rotate, how weight transfers, how you recover and move to the next person. These patterns don't disappear when you switch styles, they carry over. You can think of it as martial arts training sharing a common grammar: base, timing, angles, distance, rhythm. When you learn that grammar deeply, picking up a new style becomes learning new vocabulary, not relearning movements. It's why elite wrestlers can jump into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and progress so quickly. And it's why deeply studying one practical striking system, where you ingrain stance, footwork, hip rotation, and leg drive, makes other striking arts feel familiar almost immediately. Bruce would benefit massively from making his first few systems automatic. That way, when he eventually studies dozens of styles, he isn't relearning fundamentals, he's fine-tuning them. And if the goal is to become the world's most adaptable combatant, he deliberately structured his early training where he built a few systems so deeply that everything else stacks on top of them. From around age 18 until year 1 as Batman, Bruce traveled the world and trained again under dozens of masters, learning, according to comic canon, over 127 martial arts. Again, I won't be planting a flag in the ground for or against the argument that that is humanly possible. But if a hypothetical real Batman did set out to learn dozens of styles, a more realistic approach would be learning them in clusters, built off existing foundations, rather than randomly bouncing from one art to the next, like we sometimes see him doing in the comics. For example, he could start with a striking focused cluster built off his Muay Thai, Taekwondo, and boxing base. With that foundation, Bruce could move quickly through traditional Chinese and Japanese striking heavy systems, learning one after another at a much faster pace. From there, he could take those skills into more isolated environments and study deadlier shadow styles under masters like Kirigi, progressing much quicker than he'd otherwise be able to do. Movement and skills from Muay Thai and boxing, punching, elbows, knee strikes, clinching, and using angles, were transferable skills to help him pick up Dutch kickboxing, Krav Maga, Jeet Kune Do, and Silat. And the footwork and dexterity built through Taekwondo could be adapted to learning Savate. Next would be a grappling-focused cluster, built off wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and judo. He could layer sambo, catch wrestling, and advanced judo. With his wrestling conditioning base and understanding of controlling and manipulating opponents, he could methodically learn more submissions, throws, joint locks, and pressure point manipulation from Aikido, Chin-Na, and Hapkido. Then would come a weapons-focused cluster, building off fencing and Kali art. Bruce would move into Kendo, Kenjutsu, staff fighting, arts like Bo, Jo, and Hanbo, along with weapon systems of ninjutsu or shinobi learned in more remote regions. Kali-style martial arts, much like Muay Thai for empty hand striking, could act as a universal base, teaching blade alignment, double weapon coordination, flow, footwork, lines of attack, and practical street fighting efficiency. The same foundation of timing, precision, and distance management he'd already built would also accelerate his training with firearms and tactical weapons under mentors like Luca Jungo and David Kane. His last cluster would most logically be tactical training and combat psychology, where he'd mesh together, refine, and test everything he learned into his own highly practical and efficient system, as we partly see him doing with Richard Dragon in the comics. It would include working with military close quarters combat instructors, survival experts, and man-hunting tacticians, mastering silent takedowns, escapes, large group fighting, and high-pressure decision-making, along with whatever borderline supernatural, crouching tiger, hidden dragon, half a finger from death technique Lady Shiva felt like teaching him. But again, That would probably have been after he'd become Batman. He tests all this in, let's just say, very stressful environments, like his time with African Bushman tribes, or the infamous death match in Norway, where he fought for 28 straight hours because he refused to kill anyone. The last phase is where Bruce stops being just a martial artist and also becomes a tactician. Mastery here isn't about learning more techniques. It's about making everything he already knows work under fatigue, stress, and real-world constraints. So while I did my best meathead research here, drawing from the best experts in martial arts, combat training, and motor science I could study from, and instructors I've learned under, some of you may have a different perspective. And part of why I started this channel was to not only share ideas, but to also learn from all of you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Because who knows, if this channel gets big enough, maybe I can quit one of my other jobs and have plenty of time to flood your feed with more Batman and superhero training videos than you can stand. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. And I'll see you next time they shine my light in the sky.